biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition, a great opportunity for us to look at all sorts of issues that have been taking place this week, look ahead to next week, and as you well know, yesterday we really launched our Pray for America campaign. Thank you, those of you that have already signed up, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute, but we recognize that the Supreme Court has agreed to take on the issue of marriage, and so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. Then we'll talk about another Supreme Court case having to do with the Affordable Care Act, and then we'll move into many other topics. We've got lots to cover, and of course yesterday the FCC actually enacted net neutrality rules, so lots to cover even in the first hour, much less over the 2 hours, so I hope you'll stay with us, and a little bit later we'll open up the phones to give you a chance to join the conversation. Penna, Dexter with me, and it's been a busy week, hasn't it?
It's been a busy week. You've had some great people on, and it's also a big news week, and next week will be big too, because the Supreme Court's going to hear this case, King versus Burwell, on Obamacare, and what it has to do with is the subsidies for Obamacare when they set up, and our listeners are probably familiar with it, but just to go over the basics, when they set up Obamacare, they said that the subsidies that would go to people getting insurance would come through the states when the states set up their exchanges, but hardly any states set up exchanges, so they sort of tweaked the rules so the federal government could provide these subsidies. That has been challenged and is actually going to the Supreme Court next week, so Republicans are going to have to come up with something to replace Obamacare or to bridge the gap. And I know we'll be talking about that because it's going to, if it's ruled that these subsidies are unconstitutional, Obamacare will kind of fall apart unless something is done. And you need to do something. Now that you've hooked them onto Obamacare, there needs to be a bridge. So that would be a good point of discussion today. And certainly the huge case that concerns so many of us is the case on same-sex marriage. Is there a constitutional provision that basically mandates that we allow same-sex marriage in the country?
Well, again, we have encouraged you to join with us in praying for America. We have the Pray for America booklet, and I'll bring some copies in here in the studio. We can talk a bit through that, but it gives you some of the key verses, some of the very significant challenges, then pull some of the principles that are in my book, A Biblical Point of View on Spiritual Warfare, on prayer. But as we said before, you can't send petitions to the Supreme Court. You can't vote the Supreme Court justices out of office, but you certainly can pray. So let's talk about those two issues. And one of those, of course, is the issue of same-sex marriage. And Penna, yesterday I borrowed heavily from one of your commentaries, which we make available so often, Sweet Cakes. We talked about the story of Melissa Klein, Aaron and Melissa Klein. And I think it's a good illustration to anybody that says, well, what's the harm if we allow some individuals who have same-sex attraction to get married? Well, what the harm is that we have stories, as we told just yesterday, of Baronelle Stutzman, a florist in Washington, and Aaron and Melissa Klein bakery in Oregon. And those are just two examples we used yesterday of individuals that are not only losing their business, but could even lose their entire livelihood over an issue of whether or not they decided that they would or would not bake a cake or make a flower arrangement for a same-sex ceremony.
Lest anyone sort of adopt their position on this because of some kind of misguided compassion for homosexuals, it's really good to talk up these cases and show the harm that's happened where, the Gresham, Oregon couple The Kleins have lost their business. They're probably going to go bankrupt because of the fine. And Baronelle Stutzman could even lose her home, her business and her home. And this is simply for standing on principle. I read an article about Baronelle Stutzman. She's in Washington State, I think,
in Richmond.
One of the members of the couple that it was a florist shop. One of the members of the couple that was seeking flowers for their quote unquote wedding was, a good customer. And when he came in to talk about the flowers, she put her hand on his hand and just talked about, him. And she was nice and gracious, but she said, it's my faith. I cannot do a same-sex wedding. And, she was trying to just elicit a little bit understanding of that. They'd had a relationship before, but it was just, it was not reciprocated. They came back and sued her, and now they're really out to get her.
I know. They had been customers for 7 years, I think is what we found out. And as you pointed out, she had actually done all sorts of other things for them over the years. They had had an anniversary celebration, birthday celebration. So a very loyal customer, but then decided to go after her, as you pointed out, and not only go after her business, which is going to be decimated, but also now the Attorney General in the state of Washington has decided that they can go after everything, including her home. So anybody that thinks that this is not going to have an impact need only look at a couple of these stories or even listen to some of the conversations we've had with Brad Dacus and with Matt Staver, both of whom have set forth material that you could put in your church bylaws so that you might be able to protect your pastor and your church, because if indeed the decision comes down to legalize same-sex marriage, you can see some coming to the local church there and saying, I want to have a ceremony in your church, and say, well, I don't believe in that. Well, okay, then we'll sue you. But I think there are ways to protect yourself with some of these bylaws.
And the people, I think, are concerned about this across America. Republican, Democrat, liberal, well, mainly the conservatives across the country are definitely concerned because they can see what's coming. And there was a survey that went out there, and the results were released last week by Family Research Council. And it comes from Wilson Research, and it says 61% of Americans agree that states and citizens should remain free to uphold marriage as the union of a man and a woman. So it's good to have not only these cases of businesses being hurt out there, but also it's good to have these numbers out there to show if the justices have any doubt in their mind where the people stand, the people still favor marriage as between one man and one woman.
And I think on there they even said that 81% agreed that a government should not force a business to do that. So 61% is significant, but when more than 8 out of 10 Americans, and I looked through that initial survey, I don't have it with me right now, even atheists, even people who never go to church, also agreed with that idea. There was a majority in every case that agreed that the government should not force individuals in their businesses to do things that violate their conscience, because they recognize you would never force a Jewish delicatessen to carry non-kosher food. You'd never force a Muslim establishment to carry food that was not halal. I mean, you can begin to think about all the problems that would surface instantaneously. So the American people are on our side. It's just that some of these elites decided that they are going to be heavy-handed and force some of these people out of business.
It makes you wonder what kind of a decision the court will come down with. I mean, they could decide in favor of same-sex marriage and yet put some exemptions in for religious businesses, for churches, and all of that. But sometimes exemptions, work for a little while, and they start to erode, and that's what would worry me.
Yeah, if you wonder about exemptions, just ask Hobby Lobby. Yeah, maybe it applies to a church, but it doesn't apply to a business that has a profit entity or something of that nature. So this is one of the reasons we encourage you to pray for America, and certainly the key issue that we've talked about and is in the material that we will make available to you is on this issue of same-sex marriage. But when we come back from the break, Penna really began to introduce this second issue that will be decided before the Supreme Court, and it will be discussed and debated and presented before the court next week. So we want to talk about what this could mean to the Affordable Care Act. So stay tuned. We'll talk about other very important prayer targets right after this.
Point of View commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Americans have been watching the influence of Islam in Europe and in the Middle East and wonder what might happen in this country. One way to consider the potential influence of Islam is to look at the book by Peter Hammond, Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam. Most people have never read the book, but they probably have seen in an email one of the most quoted parts of the book. He argues that when the Muslim population is under 2%, like in Canada, the influence of Islam is not significant. In the 2 to 5% range, they begin to seek converts and target the disaffected. When the population reaches 5%, they begin to exert their influence and start pushing for Sharia law. Hammond sees a significant change when the Muslim population reaches 10%, as we see in France, Russia, and India. At that point, he says, you see increasing levels of violence and lawlessness, and once the population reaches, say, 20%, there is an increase in rioting and jihad militias. At 40%, nations like Bosnia and Lebanon experience widespread massacres and ongoing militia warfare. By the time half of the population is Muslim, he has found that the country persecutes infidels and apostates and implements Sharia law over all of its citizens. By 80%, you see countries like Iran and Syria engage in persecution and intimidation as a daily part of life. Often, state-run genocide develops in an attempt to purge all infidels, and as the percentage of Muslims increase from there, you see Dar es Salim, the Islamic House of Peace. Peter Hammond would probably be the first to say that these are generalizations and there are exceptions to this general rule. But it's easy to see from both history and our current situation that when the Muslim population is small, their leaders' focus is on winning converts and partially implementing Sharia law. But when their numbers are larger, the radical Muslim leaders take over and Islamic domination begins. That is why we should pay attention to what happens at home. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me, and we've talked about this Pray for America campaign. I've got a copy here of the Pray for America brochure, and it goes through a number of things, gives you many of the key verses that are very important, talks about how important this issue of same-sex marriage is, and then some very important principles, many of which were taken from my book, A Biblical Point of View on Spiritual Warfare. We want to send that to you, and as you sign up, you can either go to the website pointofview.net, or for those of you that receive an email, we sent that out yesterday. Just follow the hyperlink, and we will send you the booklet and then occasional updates. But one of the things, obviously, Penna, we need to talk about and have been talking about is the marriage issue that the Supreme Court will consider and decide by June. But another one, which we have information about on the website, comes from Senator Ben Sasse. Now, the last time I had Ben Sasse on the program, he was candidate Ben Sasse, and now
from Nebraska.
From Nebraska, and had served in the Department of Health and Human Services. So he brings, again, a level of expertise. I'm so grateful when we can have somebody like a Michael Burgess or a Tom Coburn, or in this case, a Ben Sasse. Now, he's not a doctor, but he brings a lot of healthcare policy to it. But again, just as background, you already mentioned the fact that you have 37 states that never did set up a state exchange. And the law was written, this is not an accident, the law was intentionally written to force the states to set up an exchange. And the only way that you could receive a subsidy for Obamacare, for the Affordable Care Act, is if there was a state exchange. There is not. The Obama administration said, oh, no problem, we'll just provide it anyway, and that's why this suit has gone to the Supreme Court. So it will be interesting, first of all, to see how the court rules, But Ben Sasse is kind of playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. He's looking down the road saying, okay, what if, quote, his side wins and the Supreme Court decides that the law as written is actually supposed to be implemented? What happens to all those people that had subsidies? And he's got some suggestions. Well,
because this is what the administration would do. If they lose in court, they will turn it around and use it as a weapon that, those bad Republicans who brought this lawsuit are now leaving people out in the cold without insurance coverage. Because what will happen is people who are getting subsidies in one of the 37 states that's on the federal exchange won't get their subsidies anymore, and they definitely will not be able to afford health insurance there, or they wouldn't be getting the subsidy. So they'll be left out in the cold unless the Republicans come up with a plan. Well, it takes time to get that through the system. So this is a wise legislator here.
I think so, very much.
He really said he's proposed a two-part strategy, and it's based on COBRA. You know, if you've ever left a job and you carry your COBRA insurance with you for 18 months, you've got the same coverage throughout those 18 months. You've got to pay for it, but you've got the coverage. And so it has sort of a tie to that kind of idea, so that people could have a bridge until a new health insurance plan that's much more free market, one would hope, is crafted by Congress and implemented.
You know, one of the things that we see so often in politics is choose your evil, because in this case you say either we support the rule of law and thus say you're not eligible for subsidies, and then we throw 12,000 people that are receiving chemotherapy right now out on the street, 10,000 people that are receiving kidney dialysis out on the street, or we say, well, we'll ignore the rule of law and then we'll keep the subsidies going even though we know we broke the law. And I appreciate the fact that he has figured out a way to make sure that we don't have to make that kind of Faustian bargain or that Hobson's choice or whatever you want to call it. And that is that here we should support the rule of law, because the bill was written to say that unless you have a federal exchange established in the state, which would be called then a state exchange, you cannot receive a subsidy. And 37 states, most of the listeners to Point of View are in states, not all, but most of them are in states that do not have that state exchange. So if they needed a subsidy, they should not receive it according to the law. So he's come up with the idea that, well, let's put together a COBRA law. That would only last for about 18 months. So instead of just trading one subsidy for another, you're trading a subsidy for a stopgap measure. So then what you do, I guess, is the second part of the strategy. What's that? Well,
you've put the pressure on Congress then to come up with a good plan, a free market health care plan, and start to implement that. So they've got to get to work right away and do that, because the other, I guess, fix the Obama administration could pull would be to make this a single-payer national health care system. They could actually, say we've got to pass another law. We've got to make Obamacare much more top-down than it already is. Let's get the states out of the equation. So the states and the conservatives in Congress need to come up with something, a good free market plan.
Well, and again, let me mention one quick point, because I want to open up the phones, because I think many of you are going to have some comments about that. When you talk about a COBRA plan, he doesn't explain it a whole lot because it's just a short column in the Wall Street Journal, but a typical COBRA plan means that I can stay on my insurance, but I have to pay for it. Well, obviously what I think is talking about here is you would have a COBRA-like plan, but the government would provide a subsidy, because if they couldn't pay for it before,
to get you through the 18 months.
So for anybody who hears the word COBRA and says, well, wait a minute, that's not a solution, I'm sure that's exactly the other part of it. And that then, I think, puts a time limit on it. The problem is right now, as you know, nothing seems to happen until the 11th hour. I've been watching some of these NFL contracts, and they're all waiting until the 11th hour to decide whether or not they're going to keep this person or cut this person or give them the franchise designation. And the same thing you've been seeing right now happen in sports has been happening for years in the government. It's only when the guillotine blade is coming down that finally Congress acts. Well, this 18-month limit would be one that would provide a transition, but it would force, first of all, every candidate running for the presidency to explain how he or she is going to solve that problem. And number two, I think it would also force the members of Congress to actually come up with a workable plan,
because you have lots of ideas floating around both the House and the Senate, but nothing that's coalesced into a real plan that could be put forward.
Well, and, to be fair, the Democrats have not even allowed those plans to be surfaced. There was a good plan when we were debating Obamacare that was much different from Obamacare. It just was never allowed to be discussed. But now the composition of Congress is different. You hear these words like replace, repeal, delegate, defund, and all of that. It would be nice in the debates as these Republicans begin to vie against each other for the nomination, if some people would come up with, you can see a Ted Cruz, for instance, with his brain coming up with a really good plan. Mm-hmm. You can see maybe a Scott Walker who's up in Minnesota. I mean, you can see some of these folks coming up with a really good plan, and for that to be out there and part of the presidential debate would be wonderful.
So again, this is going to be very important, and for those of you that are kind of sitting back and saying, well, lots of times you're talking about issues that don't affect me, this one will. Either directly or indirectly. First of all, if you do not make enough for you to afford one of the plans that are actually on the government website, then you are going to be eligible for a subsidy. But if you're in one of those 37 states and you have been receiving a subsidy, then you've been receiving it illegally due to no fault of your own. It was paid to you by the government when the government shouldn't have done it in the first place. But that is certainly going to be a big issue. And if indeed they don't accept Senator Ben Sass's bill, then you're going to have the Congress being forced to either rewrite the law or go to a single payer plan or something like that. But it will also affect all of us indirectly, because it all gets back to how much leeway will the Supreme Court give to the executive branch, because there have been exemption after exemption, moving of deadlines and time stamps. And if this time the Supreme Court says, just because it says it in the law doesn't really mean it that way, then you have given a free hand to this president to do what he's done on immigration, what he's done now with the FCC, and much, much more. So if you'd like to join our conversation, we would welcome your phone calls today. 1-800-351-1212. We've only put two issues on the table. One about the Supreme Court looking at the issue of same-sex marriage. The second, the Supreme Court looking at this issue of the Affordable Care Act. When we come back, we'll maybe get into a few others. One of those is we have a real issue before the Congress right now about whether they will fund the Department of Homeland Security and at what level, because of the question of the amnesty action, the executive order by President Obama. Of course, we had a decision yesterday by the FCC to move forward and implement net neutrality, and what that might mean we'll talk about in just a minute, and many other issues as well. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to the break. Bob's going to tell you a little bit more about Pray for America, and if you have not taken the time to sign up, the Pray for America campaign is on. It's an opportunity for you to find out more about some of these important prayer targets to Pray for America, and we want to send you this booklet on praying for America. It's all available to you, and we hope that you'll visit the website pointofview.net, click on that button, and sign up. We'll be right back.
Are you ever frustrated with America's leaders? I know. Are you ever not frustrated? So, what are you doing about it? In Proverbs chapter 21, the Spirit of God hits us with this: the king's heart, and we could say the president's heart, the senator's heart, the congressman's heart, the Supreme Court justice's heart, is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. Your prayers unleash the most powerful weapon in the universe. If you're in union with Jesus Christ, your prayers touch God's heart. So again, what are you doing about your frustrations with government? Point of View Radio is spearheading a new effort to get as many as possible to pray for America. It starts when you visit our website, pointofview.net, and click on the Pray for America picture on the right side of the page. We'll send you our Pray for America booklet and updates on things to pray for. We must pray. Click in now to pointofview.net and pray for America. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation today, weekend edition, Penna, Dexter with me, and we're going to give you some opportunities to certainly address these issues. But let me put one more on the table, and this is a big challenge because right now you have the need to fund Homeland Security. Now, they're working all sorts of different options, and one of those, of course, has been to fund Homeland Security, but not the part of the executive order by President Obama. And, of course, in the background, you also have one judge, and that is U.S. District Court Judge Andrew Hannanen, who actually entered an order of temporary injunction against the particular actions by President Obama, which are known as DAPA, stands for Deferred Action for Parents of Americans or Lawful Residents. And so that is kind of there as well. So you have some things happening in the court, you have some things happening in Congress, but Penna, it illustrates one more time, we're in the 11th hour. Mm-hmm. Funding ran out on the 26th. People can look at their calendar and recognize where we are right now. And, of course, I don't want people to think that if they don't fund it through the weekend, that all of a sudden all sorts of border agents are going to walk away or people at TSA are not going to do their job, because about 90% of the people in the Department of Homeland Security are considered essential. So even if there is not funding for that, they actually stay on the jobs. But at the same time, here we are again, one of those kind of congressional showdowns that we've begun to see as pretty typical. So what's your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because we've watched the political sort of machinations play out. We've seen the House pass something that said, okay, we're not going to fund Homeland Security unless you do something, unless we can drastically change or repeal the president's order, which would legalize 4 million illegals basically in this country. That was stopped by the court for the moment. So that's a good thing, and there's some senators are looking at that and saying, okay, we don't need to take a stand. One of those is one from Texas, John Cornyn. Others are saying, no, the court's given us ammunition. We need to go ahead now and continue on this path to change the president's executive order, as the people would like to see done, who elected a lot of the new senators to give them, a stronger majority in the Senate. So, there's that fight going on, and the Senate, of course, is acting almost like it did under Harry Reid right now. They're trying to separate the bills, and I think what will happen is there'll be a stopgap measure to fund Homeland Security, and they'll continue fighting it out for the next few weeks again.
Wow. One of the other issues I wanted to talk about is one of our callers wants to talk about net neutrality. So let's get maybe his comment, and then we'll get into this as well. We're trying to educate you on a lot of different issues simultaneously, and if this is feeling like there's too much too quickly, we'll kind of back out and try to explain a little bit more. But this has been a very busy news week. And so let's go first to Texas. KAVX William, I think you wanted to speak to this issue of net neutrality, so you have the floor.
Well, what I'd like to do is just scream real loud in Washington, and they'd had to put their hands over their ears. If the president is trying to make us mad by messing with the Internet, I think he has been very successful. I called all our people in Washington, and, of course, Gomer is the only person that has a live person answer. Everybody else wants you to leave a message. So I talked with the person up there, and this gentleman told me that I asked him how many people had called in or whatever. He said, we have a lot of people have emails and calls. And people they are just really, this cannot stand. I mean, if we can't do something to stop this, I don't know what in the world we're going to do, because this is just the most ridiculous thing. And see, nobody knows what he's going to do. Nobody knows what he's going to do, and there it is.
But we can guess.
I don't think anybody has that kind of imagination, to tell you the truth, because I have a very high IQ. In fact, my IQ is so high it's coming back again and lapping or something, and I can't get it. Everybody I've talked to, I was over at a restaurant here in Nacogdoches, and they were talking about it, and I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. I think if he's wanting to make us mad, he is sure going to knock the ball out of the park. And for what reason, I don't know why he wants to make us all just fighting mad. I mean, just ready, and don't know what to do.
Because he's of the progressive left, and he's trying to get as much done as possible in his last 2 years.
His legacy is just to destroy everything. I told somebody, we were talking about the our situation. We have had a situation having to do with going to see a doctor and everything, and that people from all over the world came to the United States. It was like a hole-in-one in golf. How can you improve on a hole-in-one? Well, you can't.
That's right.
Perfect.
That's perfect.
It's perfect, and it's just awesome. What we have just sat by and watch what's going on. I was looking for something on the internet the other day, and I got so upset because I saw somebody that had written something back in 2011. Monica Crowley or something.
Yes,
I hate pronouncing.
We know who she is. Yeah, Monica
Crowley.
Crowley.
My goodness!
I know her.
And so I found out that I could download the thing and put it on my Kindle, and I'd put it there. And this friend of mine that's almost 95 years old, he had to have hard copies, so I ordered him one right there and everything. It reads like the Daily News. What she has to say.
Well, again, a lot of people have made those predictions. Penna, go ahead. Yeah.
I guess, since he started talking about the internet and what's happened,
Let's
maybe we could explain it a little bit.
That's what I was thinking.
The left or even the Democrats say that, and some of these columnists that you read, that this idea that this is a plan to regulate the internet is not true. But with everything else that this president has done to basically take over full sectors, basically change marriage, take over healthcare, take over the financial sector. There's just so much control being exercised through the EPA and the environment that you just have to watch. Everything he does is taking us in that direction. So there were 1 million people who filed comments with the FCC about this net neutrality idea. It's been around for a while, but they've never been able to implement this. They had a plan to implement it through the FCC. President Obama came in and made it much more draconian, treating the internet like a public utility, like the telephone companies, where the reason the internet has thrived is because it's been left alone. But they're saying now, well, no, this is fully developed. It's time now we start regulating. Isn't that what government just does? So the FCC classified internet providers now as utilities. That's been done by the FCC. And certainly one part of the provisions of this is that companies cannot control what people see on the web. So that sounds good to some people, that big companies like Google or whatever cannot control what people see on the web. And also that companies can't auction off the fastest speeds to the highest bidder. And what that does supposedly is give smaller internet companies an advantage or whatever, and it penalizes larger ones. So everybody's going to figure out certainly how to take advantage of this. But what it does, it puts a big clamp on the free market that having to do with the internet. And it's worked so well that, you just have to wonder, why would we want our government to begin to micromanage the internet? But that will be what's happening. And just to define net neutrality, it's the idea that all data should be transmitted equally over the internet. There are just practical problems with that.
Well, there's certainly quite a number. And if you certainly sit here and say, well, what difference does it really make to me? First of all, I did a commentary earlier this week. Ajit Pai is one of those individuals who voted against it. And you've got to already say, if the FCC thinks this is such a good idea, why was the vote 3-2? 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. It's just kind of like the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. Democrats voted for it, Republicans did not. Really, if this is that good an idea, why can't you get at least somebody on the other side to agree with you? And I loved his line because he says it's adopting a solution that won't work to a problem that doesn't exist using legal authority we don't have. First of all, it's a solution that won't work because ultimately, anytime the government gets a hold of things, you know what happens with bureaucracies, to a problem that doesn't exist. The one example they use is the Comcast example, where they were slowing the speeds, but then when there was a challenge, they actually increased the speed. So the one example that's used actually doesn't prove their point. It proves just the opposite. The free market took care of it really quickly. And then the final point, a problem that doesn't exist using legal authority they do not have. Courts have ruled that they do not have this, and the reason the president is doing this is both the courts, in one case, and the Congress, in another case, have rejected the very thing that was implemented yesterday.
So now the courts and the Congress, there's an opportunity for both of them. A lot of people are saying that the Congress really can't overrule the FCC, but others are saying they should try. And certainly I saw a stat that over 2/3 of the House and Senate are actually on record as opposing FCC regulation.
Yeah. Back to 1934 was telephone services. And did you see Verizon the other day? To protest this, they actually put it out on typeset and Morse code. Just to illustrate, this goes all the way back to 1934. This is the 21st century. We'll be right back.
A new study of United States Census data shows that 30.3% of millennials, young adults ages 18 to 34, are still living with their parents. The report is called Young Adults Then and Now. It pulls together census numbers showing that since 1980, the slice of the population in this age group that still lived with their parents hovered around 22 to 24%. But between 2009 and 2013, the percentage of millennials still living at home shot up and is at the highest level ever. This is widely seen as a negative trend and is blamed on the slow recovery from the recession that began in 2008. I shared this information with the students in an ESL conversation class I helped teach. The students are from India and Turkey. They understood the economic hit this demographic group is taking, but this particular effect of it would not be of such concern in their countries. In Turkey, girls don't leave their parents' home until they marry. In India, young people live with parents even after marriage, at which point the couple lives with the husband's family. The recovery has been rough on American millennials. Many finished college and headed into unemployment or underemployment. Compounding the problem, older workers and others who might in a better economy have left their jobs for new opportunities, making room for millennials, have been staying put, opting for the security of the job they have. In our society where independence is valued, this situation is challenging for both young people and for parents. Could there be a silver lining? Perhaps family togetherness. There's another new study out. It comes from the Family Research Council's Marriage and Religion Research Institute, MARY, which recently released its Index of Family Belonging and Rejection. MARY also combed through census data, examining the proportion of 15 to 17-year-olds who grew up in intact married families. They found that only 46% of kids in this age group grew up with both biological parents who stayed married. Only 17% of black teenagers had the privilege of growing up with their married mom and dad. Mary's research also shows the positive impact of the intact family, especially the intact family that attends regular worship on so many outcomes for kids. So young people, if your job situation keeps you at home with mom and dad longer, take advantage of the family togetherness that some other cultures take for granted. Contribute with tangible work around the house. And parents, you can practice your role as friend, counselor, and example from close proximity. There are blessings here. Marriage is God's plan to organize the economy. Sadly, the slow recovery has contributed significantly to the drastic decline of marriage. In turn, the decline of marriage further stunts household formation and hurts the economy. Millennials tend to wait to marry until they can afford a wedding. They've got things backwards. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Put lots of topics on the table. Let's get some of your comments. We'll first of all go to Georgia, listening on the Good News Network. Judy, thank you for joining us today.
Hi. I have something that concerns me. It may not be important to a lot of people, but it is to me. As Christians, I don't believe that we should agree with such terminology as gays and homosexual marriage, because even if Christians use those terms, they're not agreeing with the philosophy or the beliefs. They are agreeing with the term, and that just gives more power to those people. and for whom, of course, we should pray. And also,
let me jump in
believe-
on that because I'm the guilty party. I use the word gay sometimes interchangeably because I gave up on that word to being used for anything else. It's just been so compromised, and you would never say, "Oh, I'm happy." Use it to equate with happy, which is the way it used to be, or festive. You would never use it that way anymore.
Christians have just used that word to be stolen from the vocabulary, and also
what would you call it if you don't call it homosexual marriage? Just counterfeit marriage or something like that?
Homosexual union.
Okay. But they're calling it marriage now. I mean, it's legally a marriage according to our government.
Well, the government's wrong about a lot of things.
Oh, that's true. I don't know. It's just you've got to be able to talk about it, though.
Yeah, I sometimes will say so-called homosexual marriage, so-called same-sex marriage, but it is tough because we have to use some of the language to communicate. But you had a second point, so I'd love to hear it. Go for it.
Yes. If I may, I would also like to say that I don't believe any homosexual or lesbian would ever be successful in so-called being married at a church that's pastored by Rodney Howard Brown in Tampa, Florida, because he, as well as many of his members, walk in such power and authority of the Lord, it wouldn't be possible. He's had witches come to his church to try to place curses on the church or on him, and they end up being saved. So I know I fall far short in that area, and I've asked the Lord to forgive me, and I'm trying to get to where He is, but I know they would not ever be successful.
It's very interesting she brings up churches because a lot of us say, well, there is an exemption for churches. They'll never have to perform same-sex marriages. But even if the government doesn't impose it on churches, we've now seen a couple of churches. They're not really big churches. The news reports them as mega churches, but this one in
Michigan, you think about?
There's one in Michigan. There's another one. I forget the name of it. I think you and I corresponded about it. But anyway, I don't have that article with me. But this particular pastor, he was in the Southern Baptist group or a Baptist denomination, and he thought about it for a long time, and he switched his policy, and his membership has dwindled. The church has shrunk by half. And, I guess it's his prerogative to do that. He's got a lot of power as pastor, and he feels like that's the best way to go. And, it's not, because it's compromising Scripture. But there will be some pastors that will do that. So I think in some sense, the church has to decide, are these denominations and individual independent churches going to stand on Scripture and be strong at the risk of maybe losing tax-exempt status or having the homosexual groups or even the government come after them? Are they going to do that, or are they going to cave? And sometimes the reason they give is because we want to minister to more people. Mm-hmm. And so, I have to give that to them. If that's their motivation, then go ahead. It's not right, because God doesn't work that way. He doesn't compromise himself.
I think one of the lessons that we're learning for both churches and businesses is you need to make up your mind ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Because we've already said, if you're a florist shop, if you're a baker, if you're a wedding planner, if you have a venue where weddings can be held, whether it's a Christian camp or whether it's church or whether it's in your home or whether it's in a hall, you need to really think ahead of time what happens when that question comes to you and have that already resolved. And again, we now spent at least now 2 different programs, one with Matt Staver and yesterday with Brad Dacus, talking about how you can at least put in your doctrinal statement that we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman as taught in Scripture, and put in your bylaws that you will not be forced to to actually perform a ceremony that contradicts the doctrinal statement of your church. And yesterday, Brad Dacus said, it's a difference of night and day between a church that has those bylaws and one that does not, a Christian camp that has those bylaws and does not. Because a good example is that Christian camp in New Jersey, they didn't have any statement about faith. So when the homosexual couple came and the two lesbians wanted to have a marriage ceremony, and they said, well, no, we're a Christian camp. Well, you have nothing in your bylaws to say that, and they lost. So it seems to me that if indeed we are moving to a new time where same-sex marriage becomes more and more legal, or a time where the Supreme Court rules that it's legal for all 50 states, churches and businesses better pay attention to how they're going to answer that question.
Yeah, I think we can ask Kelly about it, too, when he's back. I think Liberty Institute does the same thing.
Yes.
They'll help churches to put it down legally so they have it. Now, whether or not those will be challenged someday, they perhaps could, but all these groups can fight back in the courts and hopefully stand and win. We have to live defensively a little bit now against this agenda. It's really out there.
I think so. So again, we'll get when Kelly's back in studio with us, we'll ask him and also talk about the reality of some of that. And so let's, if we can, take one more phone call. And those of you that are still on the line, we'll get to you, but we only have time before the next break for Ken. He's calling in from Alabama, listening to the program on the internet. Ken, what would you like to ask?
Good afternoon, Kerby. Real quick comment, by the way, are you aware that your call-in phone number is not anywhere on your website that I could find?
Well, we'll work on that. How's
800-351-1212.
There you go, right, yeah. About the Internet, I'm wondering whether or not Congress, the House of Representatives, couldn't possibly defund the Federal Communications Commission.
Could be. That's sort of what they're trying to do right now with the issue of Homeland Security. And really, the FCC doesn't cost a whole lot, so
yeah, right. Well, but I mean, just to
defund the implementation of it or something. That's a good.
Yeah, since that's their power.
Yeah,
to get them to stop their implementation of these draconian rules that they're trying to enforce. It was just a thought. Thanks so much.
And it's an interesting one, and I think the point that I would make is that right now we're looking for members of Congress, and we do know of some, but a lot of more members of Congress to have a spine. That's required because some of these battles are worth having, and there are a few in the House and the Senate, and we've interviewed many of them on this program that do have a spine and do stand up, but the sad reality is a lot of them don't. And it was yesterday at CPAC, Ted Cruz said, don't listen to what people say, look at what people do. They can say I'm against Obamacare, or I'm against this executive action on amnesty, or I'm against the decision made by the FCC. But what have they done? And I thought it was a good question. Of course, he's trying to point to himself as a possible presidential candidate, but it's a good principle to apply whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, liberal or conservative, Christian or non-Christian. Talk sometimes is real cheap. But what are people going to do? Let's take a break. When we come back, I do want to give some more of you a chance to join the conversation. I have not been ignoring you. We'll do our best to get you on. But let's mention that we are still encouraging you, if you have not signed up for our Pray for America campaign. It's very simple. Go to the website, pointofview.net, right-hand corner, click on that button. And that's a way that we can, once we get your address, send you our Pray for America booklet, and also give you updates on very important prayer targets. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Maybe you've noticed, but Christians find many things to disagree about. But one thing that all true Christians do is pray. Point of View Radio has a plan to help you join with your family from sea to shining sea and pray for America. It starts by getting our new booklet, Pray for America, and we'll also send you occasional reminders and updates on special needs to pray for. One need that we know about is to pray for the Supreme Court. Over the next few months, they're considering the definition of marriage and whether or not to force every state to accept the fiction of so-called same-sex marriage. When the foundation of your house is compromised, the entire structure is in danger, and this decision may seriously undermine our culture's foundation and fuel a growing attack on religious freedom. Please visit our website. Look for the Pray for America picture on the right side of our homepage. You may have to scroll down just a bit. pointofview.net. Join people all across the land and pray for America. Visit right now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today. Thank you for joining us. And if you would like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter with me, and we will certainly take some more of your phone calls. If you're just joining us, in the last hour, we spent a little bit of time talking about various Supreme Court decisions. One, of course, on this issue of so-called same-sex marriage and what that might mean. Also, another decision that will come down on the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, on terms of subsidies. We also spent some time talking about Homeland Security and funding that. That, I think, will be our next phone call, so I'll take that. And then also the decision yesterday by the FCC to implement what are called net neutrality rules. Some people are calling that the Obama net now. So we'll see how that all goes. And certainly many other topics that we can put on the table, and we will take those in just a few minutes. But let's continue with a few of the phone calls from the first hour. So in California, KNLB, Jason, thank you for calling today.
Hey, long-time listener. It's been a while since I called in. Anyways, I just wanted to say that I'm torn on the whole immigration issue, because there are people right now working here from China, maybe on visas that are going to expire or already expired, and they're having children here in America. But what happens if this immigration executive order that Obama put in place and it expires, and all of a sudden somebody that's here having a child that's a second child that has to go back to China, that child will be subject to abortion or euthanasia. And there are also people here from North Korea working on this peace deal that Obama has, and they are here as a diplomatic tool for the people of North Korea. But Kim Jong-un thinks they're over here making him money. But what happens if they have to go back to North Korea? Now, on Syria, I do say that we don't know the difference between a good Syrian or a bad Syrian. And if we take all the good Syrians out of Syria, then that leaves a vacuum and gives ISIS, ISIL, or whatever you want to call them, a vacuum that they can come in and fill the region, and then they can expand out because they won't have any resistance. And what do you think about that?
Well, you put a lot on the table. Let's take one do with individuals that are maybe here legally or under a visa, and whether they would be deported back. Well, this particular action by the stands for Deferred Action for Parents of Americans or Lawful Permanent Residents, would be for people that are here illegally. If indeed they're here with a visa, then there are some very significant options that ICE provides. One of those is that they might actually face some kind of persecution. They could be considered whether or not they could seek asylum. So whether you're talking about China, or especially, I think it'd be very easy for somebody from North Korea to seek asylum. This particular order, whether it is funded or not, whether or not the injunction by District Judge Andrew Hannanen happens or not, and of course this will eventually probably make its way to the Supreme Court, I don't think that would be affected. So that's an important issue. But you've also raised the issue of Syria. We'll get to that in just a minute, because that gets us into some of the conversation we might have about ISIS and military. But Penna, what are your thoughts? Because again, right now the question is to fund Homeland Security, but to try to block what is called the DAPA program. And it seems to me that that may or may not happen. There have been a lot of people wondering whether the Republicans are going to cave on that anyway. So what's your thoughts?
Well, I think you have to have a general principle. We mentioned earlier in the program that it's good to decide what you're going to do before you're called on to do it and make a compromise. And so I think we need to have as our general principle the rule of law. And then when you have certain situations that might take you out of the box, and that's what this executive order did. It said, well, we're going to have prosecutorial discretion against people that are here illegally, and so that would mean to me that they would take it case by case. But what this president's trying to do is unilaterally weaken the laws of our land about immigration. And like, for instance, one of the members of Congress who's been strong on this says, be careful what you do with the law today, because if you weaken it today, you weaken it forever. He's the House Judiciary Committee chairman right now. And he says the thread that holds the tapestry of our country together is respect for and adherence to the rule of law. The law is the greatest unifying and the greatest equalizing force we have in our culture. So Jason brought up individual cases of Chinese people that might have a second child here, of Syrian Christians that might be here, and all of that. And certainly they have to be taken on. If they've got a real asylum hardship, they need to go before an asylum court. But to allow this executive order that would legalize 4 million people is not the solution. It's not a wise solution or a good one.
One of the things I thought was kind of interesting, and this goes back a couple of weeks, that when Judge Hannon actually ruled on this, Kelly Shackelford, if he were here right now, I know what he would say. And he says the courts are really hesitant about forcing somebody to do something. Now, if you do something wrong, the courts will jump in and say you don't have a right to do it. But if you don't do what you're supposed to do, the courts are very hesitant. And in this case, Judge Andrew Hannon actually instead didn't say, well, he isn't going to prosecute these individuals. He isn't going to deport these individuals. He isn't going to process these individuals. Instead, he focused on something else, which I thought was brilliant, and that is, the president is supposed to actually provide an opportunity for public comment, and he did not. So he used that example so that he could at least issue a temporary injunction. If this were to go to the Supreme Court might have to do the same thing, because it is generally the generally the rule, I should say, that the court most of the time will not step in when an executive hasn't done something. They usually step in when sometime they've breached some kind of protocol, which I think you've already illustrated they have. But again, that's going to be a matter of interpretation, since they put this all under prosecutorial discretion. But back to the bottom line is the examples that Jason used, don't think it's going to have too much of an impact, but it's a good illustration of why I think we need to pay attention to it. And again, this is one more example. We used it a minute ago with Obamacare. Do you want the rule of law, or do you want all sorts of people to lose their subsidies? Here's a good example. Do you want the rule of law, or do you want to deport all the people? Well, I think that's a false choice, because in many cases, we aren't going to deport these people anyway. We haven't in the past. So the president is making, I think, a false dichotomy that really isn't there.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's interesting. Some of the things he says are amazing. He actually made a threat. I don't know if people heard about it this week, but he was at a town hall in Miami, and he said that border patrol officers who continue to enforce the law at the border, that if somebody's working for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and they don't follow the president's policy, there's going to be consequences. That's so interesting, because that policy has been stayed by Judge Hannon and the court.
Yeah, well, those are just a few of the many issues on the table. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We come back, though, I did want to spend just a little bit of time talking about something that relates to our culture. And those of you that listen on the internet have already heard Penna Dexter's commentary on family togetherness. If you did not hear it, you will now find it on our website, pointofview.net. And one of the things we've begun to do is we actually send your commentary out to everybody on Saturdays. So we're going to talk about that for just a minute and then take some more phone calls. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Americans have been watching the influence of Islam in Europe and in the Middle East and wonder what might happen in this country. One way to consider the potential influence of Islam is to look at the book by Peter Hammond, Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam. Most people have never read the book, but they probably have seen in an email one of the most quoted parts of the book. He argues that when the Muslim population is under 2%, like in Canada, the influence of Islam is not significant. In the 2 to 5% range, they begin to seek converts and target the disaffected. When the population reaches 5%, they begin to exert their influence and start pushing for Sharia law. Hammond sees a significant change when the Muslim population reaches 10%, as we see in France, Russia, and India. At that point, he says, you see increasing levels of violence and lawlessness, and once the population reaches, say, 20%, there is an increase in rioting and jihad militias. At 40%, nations like Bosnia and Lebanon experience widespread massacres and ongoing militia warfare. By the time half of the population is Muslim, he has found that the country persecutes infidels and apostates and implements Sharia law over all of its citizens. By 80%, you see countries like Iran and Syria engage in persecution and intimidation as a daily part of life. Often, state-run genocide develops in an attempt to purge all infidels, and as the percentage of Muslims increase from there, you see Dar es Salim, the Islamic House of Peace. Peter Hammond would probably be the first to say that these are generalizations and there are exceptions to this general rule. But it's easy to see from both history and our current situation that when the Muslim population is small, their leaders' focus is on winning converts and partially implementing Sharia law. But when their numbers are larger, the radical Muslim leaders take over and Islamic domination begins. That is why we should pay attention to what happens at home. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some more phone calls in just a minute. And we certainly have talked about all sorts of issues. Immigration was one of those issues just a minute ago. Of course, we've talked about the FCC. We've talked about the Supreme Court decisions. I want to get into the commentary by Penna Dexter on family togetherness, but a little later, do want to get back to some foreign policy issues, and in particular, we are encouraging you, if you haven't already done so, to contact your members of Congress about the speech given by Benjamin Netanyahu. He will be speaking on March 3rd, and on the Wednesday program, I'm going to try to play a little of the audio from his speech, because it's possible that you will not have heard that, and you would like to hear what that is. Of course, on that same day, on March 4th, is when the oral arguments take place before the Supreme Court on the issue of the Affordable Care Act and those subsidies. So lots to talk about. But just to break it up for just a minute, I wanted to come to your commentary. Each week we love to talk about Penna Dexter's commentaries. This one's called Family Togetherness. It is on our website right now. You can go to the Viewpoint section and print it out. We are making it a policy that after we talk about it on Fridays, we send it out on Saturday. So now you get 6. You get 5 of mine and 1 of Penna's every week. And so I always enjoy seeing it again on Saturday, although I read it days before. That's one of the perks of being around here. And this one is interesting because we're finding more and more young people living together. And that is interesting because you talk about there could be a silver lining. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. Yes, they're cohabiting and living together, but they're also living with their parents. They're staying home and living with their parents. And the new study that took the census data to pull this together says that 30.3% of millennials who are young adults ages 18 to 34, in case you didn't know that. They are living at home with their parents. They're staying home, and it's being blamed on the recession, and it's being seen as a bad thing. I don't think it's a horrible thing that young people would stay home and live with their parents until marriage, unless they're just totally leeching off mom and dad and not helping out. And so my contention was, yes, the recovery's been tough on American millennials. And one thing that's not happened in the economy since about 2008, it's starting to kind of come back now, but that is that even that older workers are now the ones that are working, and these younger kids are not working because the older workers are just holding on to their jobs. They don't want to try to reach for something else. They want to hold on to what they've got. So you don't have this churn in the job market. So the young people are not getting the jobs, or they're working somewhere maybe part-time that doesn't really use their degree. So they're staying home with their parents. Well, I guess my idea was, well, there might be a silver lining to that, because this could be a time for family togetherness, and certainly that could be a positive, especially if the young people don't wear out their welcome. You know, they help out and they contribute to the family. And then I decided to just look at another study that just came out. I'm hoping to have one of the authors of this study on when I guest host for you, Kerby.
Sure.
It comes from Family Research Council, sort of an arm of them called MARY, Marriage and Religion Research Institute, and they released their Index of Family Belonging and Rejection and say that young people, and this is more teenagers, who grew up in intact married families are much better off on so many levels. And if they also worship together, attend a weekly service, it's even better. Again, and part of this study was only 17% of black teenagers had the privilege of growing up with their married mom and dad. And we see so many tough statistics in the black community. And so just putting those two studies together, to me, it said that family togetherness can be a good thing if everybody holds up their end of the bargain and tries to encourage one another. It's also an opportunity for parents to influence their post-college kids a little more for the good. And so, it was sort of a silver lining. I wonder if you all agree.
Yeah, well, I would think we would. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Thank you for solving my problem. I've said living together, I meant together with a family, but I misspoke. But again, that's important, because even the recent commentary I did based on Jason Riley, who's been on this program with us, points out that married black couples poverty rate is a fraction of what the black poverty rate is. So
it's really marriage
is very important. And then if you add married couples and have extended families, because let's face it, if you have, and I grew up for a while when I was going to graduate school in a place in Connecticut, and some of our listeners might remember that if you're old enough, everybody got together for Sunday dinner. And there is a value, Penna, sometimes in that Sunday dinner, because if you're not pulling your weight, maybe dad and mom have already been telling you that, you need to pick up your clothes, you need to go out and get a job. But when it's Aunt Sally looks at you and said, you don't have a job yet? You're still living with that girl, but you're not going to get married with her, and on and on and on. There is a sense in which that extended family reinforces family values. So family togetherness, which in the European countries, and certainly it's very true in many of the Asian countries, is so very important. We here in kind of this North American Lone Ranger mindset don't see the value of these extended families. So there's a good example. Family togetherness could be a real positive for many of the family values we talk about.
Well, Kerby, you mentioned other cultures, and I help out with the ESL program at our church, and it's sort of the more higher level conversation. So I bring up topics that, are of concern and talk about it and see what people have to say. Gives them a chance to talk, but it also gives me a chance to learn what's going on in their countries. And right now, the group that we have has Turkish and Indian people from India. And these people, these women in our class have said, well, it wouldn't really be a concern to our country. In Turkey, maybe a little bit, because the girls stay home until they get married. The boys sometimes like to go out and get an apartment if they can afford it. In India, even when you get married, you go and live with the family of the husband. So you never leave home. They have a lot of family togetherness. But you also mentioned marriage, and that is another really good point, I think. And that is that marriage has declined. And it could be sort of a reason for the economy staying bad, or also a result of the economy staying bad. Because I have noticed so many young people who are living together saying, I'm saving for the wedding, which is so backwards that, they've got to have this big splashy wedding. And so they're going to live together until they can afford to get married. No. I mean, I think most people in our generation, and particularly in our parents' generation, would say, no, you can get married and, struggle a little while. And you don't, the wedding isn't as important as the marriage. I think they've got it backwards.
Well, you asked for some comments, so let's see if we can pick up some. And let's go first to Kelly in Georgia. I think you have some comments about Penna's commentary, so go for it.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Very good.
Good. So, I have a 26-year-old who has moved back home after college. He's been with us now for about a year. Originally, of course, it was just going to be a few months so that he could get his money together and get a roommate and move out, but it's turned into a year, and I absolutely love it. As being the mom, I love having my chick, back at the house. But my husband is of a different opinion. He thinks we're enabling him as far as not, being responsible and getting out and starting your life. And, I just wanted to see kind of what y'all's thoughts were on that.
Ever seen the movie Failure to Launch? That's the Matthew McConaughey movie. Well, and there, if indeed you're getting that sense, that's the case. But I just happened to think about that. So that's the other extreme. But Penna, I think there's some real values in having young people stay at home. Certainly, when we moved into our house 7 years ago, we thought we were moving in with one or two. We moved in with all three of our kids. So it worked okay. Go ahead.
Well, Kelly, let me ask you, your son's got a job, right?
He does. He works full time. He makes his own money. He pays his bills. Bills consisting of medical insurance, car insurance, fun, maintenance on his truck, whatever needs to be done. He never comes to me or his dad and asks for money, and I'm extremely proud of him for that. Seeing him take care of himself, he wouldn't dream of asking us for anything. But at the same time, my husband's of the opinion that, to really be responsible, you have to stand in the line to get your lights turned back on. You have to, kind of go through the struggles, and let's not make it so easy for him. Let's not, yes, he pays his bills, but, there's really no rush for him to move out. He's got it so good right now. So that's kind of my husband's opinion, and as a mother, I kind of see what he's saying. I kind of feel like maybe we do need to start pushing him out a little bit. But he's very comfortable at home, and it's just kind of a weird situation.
Yeah, I think a lot of people face it, and you have to know your own kid. But perhaps you could place some requirements on him as responsibilities at home. That would help him to see, kind of weigh the idea of apartment or home. And maybe that would also show your husband that he is actually being really part of the support system there at home. I don't know. It's just
Absolutely.
An idea.
We need to take a break.
Good.
And if you want to stay, we can keep you. If not, I'll let you go on, and we will come back and continue this conversation for a little bit longer. Many more things to put on the table. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Don't forget, we're encouraging you to join our Pray for America campaign. We'll be right back.
Are you ever frustrated with America's leaders? I know. Are you ever not frustrated? So, what are you doing about it? In Proverbs chapter 21, the Spirit of God hits us with this: the king's heart, and we could say the president's heart, the senator's heart, the congressman's heart, the Supreme Court justice's heart, is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. Your prayers unleash the most powerful weapon in the universe. If you're in union with Jesus Christ, your prayers touch God's heart. So again, what are you doing about your frustrations with government? Point of View Radio is spearheading a new effort to get as many as possible to pray for America. It starts when you visit our website, pointofview.net, and click on the Pray for America picture on the right side of the page. We'll send you our Pray for America booklet and updates on things to pray for. We must pray. Click in now to pointofview.net and pray for America. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. This last half hour, an open line. Certainly, we have talked about the Supreme Court. We've talked about immigration. We have talked about the FCC rules. But at the moment, let's take at least one more phone call, if not more, on this commentary by Penna Dexter, Family Togetherness. And so if you'd like to join us and join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll head out to Arizona this time. Emmanuel, thank you for joining us. What would you like to share?
Well, I was listening to the lady on your program, and I agree with her. I don't think that it's going to hurt any to have your kids stay at home. I remember one time when I was going to NAU, it was summertime, so we were working the summer work program, and this one boy, he was so happy because he was going to be able to go home and visit his family. Well, his dad called him up to say happy birthday, and then he told him he can't go home because he's 18 now. And I've heard that a lot, you know, parents, and it hurts me too, especially when they say that to the kids in front of them. You know, it's like, well, you love me for 18 years, now you hate my guts or something. But it's also good for them to stay home because, I mean, I'm from a small town. I watch the news in the city, and I see all this stuff about gangs and drugs and different things like that. Not that drugs don't happen here, but not as much. But if they're at home with the parents, they're not going to be out there looking for a new family, if you know what I mean. And, I mean, you know, the mom is right. You know, she can go and take the boy when he has to go pay, or when she has to go pay her electric bill or water bill, show him how to do that. She can show him how to budget. If the dad needs to go get the car fixed or has to go do something, you know, the guy has to do, he can take the son or daughter and show them there. I mean, it's just like you graduated from high school, but now you can learn about life from your own parents. Do you agree with that?
Of course I do.
Amen. You know, those are all such good ideas. I mean, I was thinking of when I was, this is 100 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, but when I was working after college, I moved home and I paid for a cleaning lady for my mom because I was working full time, so it was kind of hard for me to do a lot of cleaning, but I did keep my own stuff clean. I cooked at least once a week for the family. And, you know, we did a couple of Bible study things together as a family. And then I had friends in, which my parents loved. And then my daughter recently got married, but she moved home for 6 months while she was engaged and just came back so she could be at home before she got married. She did have her own apartment before that. And I don't know, it was a great time. And it was a time where there was this back and forth between the parents. And I think if you have a good relationship, it can be a very valuable time. And you can think of creative ways. Have them help pay part of the mortgage payment. If you're afraid of them not standing on their own 2 feet, they could contribute part of that out of their salary if they are working. If they're not working, they do need a place to stay. But, you know, I understand the dad's worrying about that. But perhaps you can help. Use your contacts. Help your child get a job. Teach them interviewing skills. I don't think your job's done at 18.
Well, the percentage of millennials living at home is higher than it's ever been, as you point out in your commentary. So I think we should see the benefits of that. And I guess one other thing I might add, because Emmanuel's talking about, you know, it's kind of like, well, they want to kick you out. The dynamics changed a little bit. And over the last couple of weeks, we've had Dr. Norman Wright on. We've had Dr. Jim Burns on. And I think if they were around the round table, they'd say, now, parents have to recognize that when you're a parent of an 18-year-old or younger, it's very different than if you're a parent of a 22-year-old and older. You're going to give advice. And obviously, if they live under your house, they have to follow some of the rules, but also they're their own person. So sometimes parents have a little trouble making that transition. But I see some real benefits because you don't learn everything you need to know about life in the first 18 years of life, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very true.
And so it seems to me that there are some, and I've had kids say, I've heard high school kids say this. I've heard college kids say that. I don't need a father anymore. I don't need a mother anymore. Well, you know what? You need your father and mother a lot longer than you might think you do. And there's a great deal of wisdom that is passed on. And as you look at some of the cultures, let me pick one culture, Japan in particular, where there is a tremendous amount of honoring those who are older and wiser. and extended families. I have a good friend that's Chinese, and it turns out that they actually, in the Chinese language, have all sorts of special words for, when you talk about my first cousin, my second cousin. Well, they actually have special words because in China, you have so much extended families. They have special names for that rather than first cousin, second cousin, because they have extended families. Have we maybe lost so much by saying, no, it's got to be this nuclear family and that extended families should not be done? This is, I think, another, maybe, as you said, silver lining where family togetherness might be a real positive and a way to maybe educate and motivate and even mentor the next generation of millennials that find themselves at home.
Yeah, I mean, kids, it does change. And I guess I could say that there could be some conflict in these situations where the kids come back home. So, it takes some reliance on the Lord, some prayer, some good counsel to figure out, because that is going to be a gradually changing relationship, as it should be. It's just that having it in the same house or having it in separate residences would provide, perhaps different ways of doing it, but I think you're going toward the same goal. And, also in times where money's tight, really, if you've got the room and if everybody can get along, what's the problem with living in the same house and saving money?
Well, and again, I can remember not so long ago where it was very much the case, especially in agricultural context, even with my wife's family of origin, where you have the family that lives here, but then there's another house on the same part of the farmland where the next generation lives. And so you have sometimes 3 and in some cases even 4 generations of individuals. And you might say, well, that sometimes can get a little tight. I understand that. I've walked into that as well. Sometimes when you go back to the family farm there, it's like going back to the 19th century, and the patriarch or the matriarch might have too much influence. But there's also, just as I said before, some tremendous value in having an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent tell that rebellious teenager that he really probably needs to shape up here. And he might be tone deaf when it comes to the father or the mother, but he might find himself actually listening to what that uncle might say. Okay, we started a conversation. Let's go to South Carolina and WLPG. And John, what would you like to add to this conversation today?
Hey, Kerby. I enjoyed the discussion here and the going back and forth with different callers. I am a father. Me and my wife have been married for many years now. I have an 18-year-old son. And originally, as a young parent, I thought, hey, at 18, you're going to get out of the house kind of thing. I'm rather old-fashioned in some respects. But as that time's come and he knows that he can get out of the house at any point in time. But, I heard the first caller, the lady, speaking about what her husband was saying, and I can't remember the age of her son.
26.
However, how old was it?
26.
26. Yeah, and I, as a father, probably would probably go along with the same kind of line that he was going along with. Just for the simple fact of, I grew up in a fatherless home, and it really took me a long time to learn how to be a man. And as I've come to raise a son that's this old now, I know there are some things that he's going to have to do on his own, and I'm fine with him staying around if necessary. However, there becomes a point to where you have to leave the nest. And maybe that father is seeing that point, and the mother can't see it at this point.
Yeah, that's possible. You have to know your kid.
Yeah. And so I think just some good communication between the father and the mother would be essential for this. And, just maybe even letting him share in some of the burdens, because it sounded like he pays for his own stuff, but might not be understanding that there's a lot more burdens when you're out on your own. And so it might be more essential for him to kind of sharing it. And I've heard of parents doing this where they just hold the money, for rent or something else like that, and then just give it back to them later when they leave.
Yeah, I've heard of that too. It's a good idea.
Oh, good. You got some great ideas, and I unfortunately am coming up to a break. But John, thank you for calling. I hope you do so again.
All right.
Yeah. We need to take a break, and when we come back, maybe I'll take one more phone call, but I do want to mention Benjamin Netanyahu, since he's speaking and going to be giving his address before Congress on Tuesday, and we'll certainly give you coverage about that on Wednesday. As you already heard Penna talk about, she's going to cover some of the programs, and so we'll give you some opportunity next week to hear about a number of issues, but certainly as we come to a break, once again, remind you that there's an opportunity for you to join with our Pray for America campaign. We had a good response yesterday, but I'd love for those of you that are maybe just hearing about this. This is a real concern. We need to pray for our nation, pray for what is going to be before the Supreme Court. So you can find out more about that on our website, pointofview.net. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
A new study of United States Census data shows that 30.3% of millennials, young adults ages 18 to 34, are still living with their parents. The report is called Young Adults Then and Now. It pulls together census numbers showing that since 1980, the slice of the population in this age group that still lived with their parents hovered around 22 to 24%. But between 2009 and 2013, the percentage of millennials still living at home shot up and is at the highest level ever. This is widely seen as a negative trend and is blamed on the slow recovery from the recession that began in 2008. I shared this information with the students in an ESL conversation class I helped teach. The students are from India and Turkey. They understood the economic hit this demographic group is taking, but this particular effect of it would not be of such concern in their countries. In Turkey, girls don't leave their parents' home until they marry. In India, young people live with parents even after marriage, at which point the couple lives with the husband's family. The recovery has been rough on American millennials. Many finished college and headed into unemployment or underemployment. Compounding the problem, older workers and others who might in a better economy have left their jobs for new opportunities, making room for millennials, have been staying put, opting for the security of the job they have. In our society where independence is valued, this situation is challenging for both young people and for parents. Could there be a silver lining? Perhaps family togetherness. There's another new study out. It comes from the Family Research Council's Marriage and Religion Research Institute, MARY, which recently released its Index of Family Belonging and Rejection. Mary also combed through census data, examining the proportion of 15 to 17-year-olds who grew up in intact married families. They found that only 46% of kids in this age group grew up with both biological parents who stayed married. Only 17% of black teenagers had the privilege of growing up with their married mom and dad. Mary's research also shows the positive impact of the intact family, especially the intact family that attends regular worship on so many outcomes for kids. So young people, if your job situation keeps you at home with mom and dad longer, take advantage of the family togetherness that some other cultures take for granted. Contribute with tangible work around the house. And parents, you can practice your role as friend, counselor, and example from close proximity. There are blessings here. Marriage is God's plan to organize the economy. Sadly, the slow recovery has contributed significantly to the drastic decline of marriage. In turn, the decline of marriage further stunts household formation and hurts the economy. Millennials tend to wait to marry until they can afford a wedding. They've got things backwards. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna Dexter with me, and I might mention that she will be doing some of the programs next week. I know you have Patrick Fagan on, Dr. Patrick Fagan, and he'll be talking about the Black Family Report, and he's been with the Family Research Council before that. He's also been with the Heritage Foundation. So some of the things we've been talking about in terms of family togetherness will be next week. And as I have mentioned before, and we'll get to in just a minute, because Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking Tuesday, we'll give you some of the audio on Wednesday, and we'll also have Reza Kahili with us. I know at one point we had Frank Gaffney scheduled.
Fantastic.
But Reza Kahili used to be with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a CIA agent, double agent. It's kind of interesting how that played out. And so he'll be able to talk about Iran, and that is, of course, the topic of Benjamin Netanyahu. But next week you've got a pretty good lineup of various guests, and I'll be here some days, you'll be here other days, and we encourage people to listen every single day.
Every single day, because listen, there's so much going on that we've got to like stick topics into the show at the last minute sometimes to cover it all, and we will try to do that as we always do. I might mention another one of my guests on Monday is going to be fun because there's this new organization called Save the Stork, and they do sort of mobile van type, sort of little, more than that, RVs. And they're fantastic little labs for you to go in and get a test outside of a pregnancy center. You know, some pregnancy centers have all the testing, others don't. And this guy has so many ideas to advance the cause of life. His name is Joe Baker. He'll be joining me, too.
He is very creative, and if you have not been to Save the Storks, Penna will spend some time talking about that. Go to the website. It's very creative, very creative man, so I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. And before we get to Benjamin Netanyahu, we've got one call left over when we talked about immigration, so let's focus on that one for a minute, and then we'll talk about the speech by Benjamin Netanyahu next week. We'll go to California, KLMB, and Kathy. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes. What I'm concerned about the amnesty is the fact that nobody really knows who it is that Obama wants to give amnesty. You had the Tanayas brothers who were like from the Baltic country, and my concern is, does anybody have any idea where most of the people that Obama, I mean, I live in a border state where we do need a fence, and I agree with that. But do we have any clue about the people that will get amnesty that have fallen off the radar? I mean, in the famous words of Janet Napolitano, he pinged when he left, but he didn't ping when he came in. And that was the Tanayas brothers, and he had been gone for 6 months, and we had to get information from the KGB to know exactly what he was up to.
Well, they were here legally, so that probably wouldn't be affected by this. But I will say, when you talk about knowing who's here, this executive order makes that very difficult, much more difficult even than it is already. So, you know, that reason alone, that security reason, is an important reason to not implement the president's executive order.
You know, you might have read about the FBI arrested 3 men in Brooklyn, and they were attempting to join ISIS, and they ranged in ages from 19 to 30. One was from Uzbekistan. Actually, 2 were from Uzbekistan. One was from Kazakhstan. And part of the problem is sometimes they come over here on a legal visa, but then they overstay their visa. And according to Senator Marco Rubio, almost 40% of the people that are here illegally, they didn't cross our border illegally. They came here legally, but they overstayed their visa. So that's certainly an issue. And so we can be grateful that they were able to catch these individuals. But interestingly enough, the FBI director, when he was addressing the National Association of Attorney Generals yesterday, I guess it would now be Wednesday, he said, we have investigations of people in various states of radicalization in all, 50 states.
ISIS is in our country.
I have
everywhere.
Never seen that until the statement by the FBI. So I don't care if you live in Wyoming, North Dakota, certainly California or Texas or New York or Rhode Island, all 50 states. ISIS.
You know, I always wondered, too, when we talk about visas, I remember during the last campaign for the president, Mitt Romney talked about how, you know, we've got some pretty good minds in this country. We ought to be able to figure out a way to, you know, very accurately track people and contact them and keep control of their whereabouts when they come in and overstay a visa. You know, why can't we do that? And I think that's something that we could do. If you want to fund something, fund that.
I would certainly agree with that. Just before we run out of time, again, next week, in addition, of course, the great programs you're going to be doing, I'll try to do one on Wednesday, talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. And Peter Rolfe, who is a contributor and editor for U.S. News and World Report, I think summarizes one of the reasons why we want you to take action. He said, we have the specter of leading American Democrats turning their backs on Israel's leader by urging the U.S. House Speaker John Boehner to withdraw his invitation to the Israeli Prime Minister. First of all, not going to happen. As they should have learned following the vote on Obamacare, you have the president's back, but it is a costly decision to do so. He goes on to say, is a deal with Iran, which is probably the largest sponsor of terror groups anywhere on the globe, at the expense of the security of Israel, America's strongest ally in the Middle East, worth it? What does the United States get out of that? And can we really trust the religious fanatics who actually run Iran to behave responsibly with nuclear weapons should they ever acquire the ability to manufacture them? That's what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be speaking about on Tuesday, and we'll try to cover some of that on Wednesday. And if you have not contacted your 2 senators and representative, we still have our Take Action section there as well to stand with Israel, and we encourage you to encourage them to go to that message and to support the nation of Israel.
You know, wherever your congressman or your 2 senators stand on Iran or on this issue, they should do the statesmanlike thing and just go. I mean, since when are members of Congress immune from having to hear views they don't agree with? They should go. He's been invited before the House, and he should be able to voice his opinion. He's got a lot of expertise, more than any other world leader, on Iran and the threat of Iran. And then once it's time to approve what the White House ends up negotiating with Iran, or perhaps trying to influence what the White House is doing right now through our foreign policy with Iran, then they can take what they want to out of the speech. But they should definitely go. That's ridiculous to think of boycotting something like that.
Well, again, Monday you're going to be sitting in this chair, yes, and it's just going to be a great program. I'll be listening as I have a chance to go to meet with some of our contacts and another network, and then we're going to be back to pull together some of the material. So again, Penna Dexter will be hosting next week. Of course, I'll be here later in the week, and just a great opportunity for you to learn lots of things. And one more time, as you visit our website, pointofview.net, the Viewpoint section has Penna Dexter's Family Togetherness, and you can see how that generated some conversation. Maybe you should take it. Maybe click on the share button, put it on your Facebook page, see what kind of conversation you can come up with, or maybe print it out. Have conversation around the family dinner table. Be a good conversation point. We have our Take Action section where you can stand with Israel. All we ask you to do is give us your name and address, and then that will show you what your 2 senators and representative are. We have a suggested message you can send to them, or you can modify it any way you would like. And then finally, let me mention that yesterday we began our Pray for America campaign. I sent an email to you so you can follow up on the email that you received yesterday, or simply go to the website pointofview.net, click on that button that says sign up, and that is an opportunity for us to send you this new booklet we've put together on Pray for America. It's got some great key verses, some prayer targets, as well as some basic principles about prayer from my book, A Biblical Point of View on Spiritual Warfare. And then we'll also give you updates on various prayer updates. And we've certainly given you lots of prayer targets today, haven't we? And if you think we've covered everything, we haven't. Matter of fact, those of you watching online can see papers scattered all over this table. So we'll do our best next week to try to cover some of the things we didn't cover today. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday.
Maybe you've noticed, but Christians find many things to disagree about. But one thing that all true Christians do is pray. Point of View Radio has a plan to help you join with your family from sea to shining sea and pray for America. It starts by getting our new booklet, Pray for America. And we'll also send you occasional reminders and updates on special needs to pray for. One need that we know about is to pray for the Supreme Court. Over the next few months, they're considering the definition of marriage and whether or not to force every state to accept the fiction of so-called same-sex marriage. When the foundation of your house is compromised, the entire structure is in danger, and this decision may seriously undermine our culture's foundation and fuel a growing attack on religious freedom. Please visit our website. Look for the Pray for America picture on the right side of our homepage. You may have to scroll down just a bit. pointofview.net. Join people all across the land and pray for America. Visit right now, pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.